That most of what the brain's doing, it's doing spontaneously all the time.
That a specific set of regions within the human cerebral cortex consistently showed decreased activity when individuals engaged in a variety of novel, goal-directed tasks compared to a quiet resting state with their eyes closed. Disruptions in the default mode network are associated with conditions such as depression, Alzheimer's disease, schizophrenia, PTSD, anxiety disorders, and addiction. Dr. Marcus Raichle, an American neurologist and neuroscientist, argued in 2001 that a baseline or control state is fundamental to the understanding of most complex systems. Defining a baseline state in the human brain, arguably our most complex system, poses a particular challenge.
I think it's probably fair that there's a paradigm shift going on here in the way we think about the brain. That the focus has so long been on making the brain do things and ignoring what it's doing all the time. And this seems to me to reorganize that focus, that most of what the brain's doing, it's doing spontaneously all the time.
Neuroscience is a scientific study of the nervous system, including the brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, as well as their functions and disorders. It is an interdisciplinary field that integrates anatomy, physiology, molecular biology, developmental biology, psychology, chemistry, physics, computer science, medicine, statistics, and mathematical modeling to explore the structure and function of neurons, glial cells, and neural networks. Neuroscience seeks to uncover the biological foundations of learning, memory, behavior, perception, and consciousness, an endeavor that Nobel laureate Eric Kandel described as the epic challenge of the biological sciences. The study of the nervous system can be traced back to ancient Egypt, one of the earliest known medical practices, trepanation, the process of drilling or scraping a hole into the skull to treat head injuries, mental illnesses, or relieve pressure, was documented during the Neolithic era. During the late Middle Kingdom period, Egyptians routinely removed the brain as part of the mummification process, reflecting the widespread belief that the heart, rather than the brain, was the center of intelligence and consciousness. This perspective remained largely unchallenged until the time of the Greek physician Hippocrates, who proposed that the brain played a central role in sensation and thought, observing that sensory organs such as the eyes, ears, and tongue are located near the brain. Hippocrates argued that the brain was not only responsible for processing sensory information, but was also the seat of intelligence. The Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca writes that the fact that the body is lying down is no reason for supposing that the mind is at peace. Rest is far from restful. Over time, the field of neuroscience has expanded significantly, encompassing a wide range of methods and perspectives for studying the nervous system at multiple levels of complexity. The tools and techniques available to neuroscientists have advanced dramatically, evolving from molecular and cellular investigations of individual neurons to sophisticated brain imaging technologies that examine sensory processing, motor function, and cognitive activity in the living brain. Dr. Marcus Raichle and Abraham Z. Snyder wrote that the difficulty also arises because the field of neuroscience is rapidly expanding. Neuroscientists now are obliged to understand not only the concepts and strategies of cognitive psychology, but also a wide array of behavioral disciplines covered under the rubric of social neuroscience. At the same time, behavioral scientists interested in relating their work to the brain are confronted by a rapidly increasing body of knowledge concerning the physiological correlates of functional neuroimaging signals. Understanding this work depends on complex concepts, not only from neurophysiology, but also from theoretical neuroscience, cell biology, and even genetics. In neuroscience, the default mode network is a large-scale brain system that includes regions such as the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, precuneus, and angular gyrus. The default mode network is most active when the mind is at rest and not focused on the external environment, such as during daydreaming, mind wandering, or quiet reflection. It is also engaged during internally directed mental activities, including self-reflection, thinking about others, recalling past experiences, imagining the future, and processing complex thoughts related to ongoing tasks. Researchers believe the default mode network plays a central role in generating the brain's ongoing internal narrative and contributes significantly to the development and maintenance of one's sense of self. Since the landmark publication of a default mode of brain function, the topic has become a major area of neuroscience research, leading to the publication of more than 3,000 scientific papers.
The default brain, to start it that way, is a concept that I think relates to the fact that the brain is active all of the time, irregardless of whether you're awake or you're asleep or you're engaging in a particular task or you're daydreaming or whatever. The brain is operating almost at full capacity or full strength pretty much all of the time. And when we engage in a task, then it departs to some extent from that, depending on the nature of the task. So the notion of the default brain, which I suppose has some attachment to computer programs and so forth, they have a default setting. Well, the brain has, I think, an ongoing default mode of activity, which is highly organized, very energy consuming. In fact, it consumes most of the energy that the brain consumes, which is a very large amount.
Dr. Marcus Raichle writes in 2015 that its discovery was an unexpected consequence of brain imaging studies first performed with positron emission tomography, in which various novel, attention-demanding, and non-self-referential tasks were compared with quiet repose, either with eyes closed or with simple visual fixation. The default mode network consistently decreases its activity when compared with activity during these relaxed non-task states. The discovery of the default mode network reignited a long-standing interest in the significance of the brain's ongoing or intrinsic activity. Presently, studies of the brain's intrinsic activity, popularly referred to as resting state studies, have come to play a major role in studies of the human brain in health and disease. Hans Berger, the inventor of the electroencephalogram, the EEG, was among the first scientists to suggest that the brain remains continuously active, even during periods of rest. In a series of papers published in 1929, Berger demonstrated that the brain's electrical activity, measured through oscillations detected by the EEG, persisted even when individuals were not engaged in any specific task. Later, in the 1950s, Louis Sokolov and his colleagues expanded on this idea by observing that the brain's metabolic activity remained relatively constant when subjects shifted from a resting state to solving demanding mathematical problems. Their findings suggested that the brain maintains a high level of ongoing activity even in the absence of focused mental effort. Raichle and Snyder published that by the early 1980s, PET began to receive serious attention as a potential functional neuroimaging device in human subjects. The study of human cognition with neuroimaging was aided greatly by the involvement of cognitive psychologists in the 1980s, whose experimental strategies for dissecting human behaviors fit well with the emerging capabilities of functional brain imaging. Researchers began to notice that when a person is involved in perception, language, and attention tasks, the same brain areas become less active compared to passive rest, and labeled these areas as becoming deactivated. Dr. Marcus Raichle writes in A Default Mode of Brain Function that the functional brain imaging studies in normal human subjects with positron emission tomography, PET, and functional MRI, fMRI, have consistently revealed expected task-induced increases in regional brain activity during goal-directed behaviors. These changes are detected when comparisons are made between a task state designed to place demands on the brain and a control state with a set of demands that are uniquely different from those of the task state. Although the human brain accounts for only about 2% of the body weight, it consumes nearly 20% of the oxygen we extract from the air we breathe. The signal used by PET to map changes in neural activity in the human brain is based on local changes in blood flow. Increased neural activity in a local brain region increases blood flow in that region. Scientists have known of this robust relationship for well over 100 years through repeated demonstrations in laboratory animals and humans. For much of the decade following the introduction of subtractive methods in neuroimaging research, most findings reported in the scientific literature focused on increases in brain activity, commonly referred to in cognitive neuroscience as activations. According to the principles of subtractive analysis, increases in activity are expected when comparing a task condition to a control condition, provided that the assumption of pure insertion remains valid. Under this assumption, adding a cognitive process to a task should not alter the functioning of other processes already involved, leading researchers to primarily observe activity increases rather than decreases. Dr. Marcus Raichle and Abraham Z. Snyder write, subtracting functional images acquired in a task state from ones acquired in a control state was a natural extension of mental chronometry in which one measures the time required to complete specific mental operations, isolated by the careful selection of task and control states. This approach, in various forms, has dominated the cognitive neuroscience agenda ever since, with remarkably productive results. In 1997, Dr. Marcus Raichle, Gordon Shulman, and their colleagues observed that a specific set of regions within the human cerebral cortex consistently showed decreased activity when individuals engaged in a variety of novel, goal-directed tasks compared to a quiet resting state with their eyes closed. This discovery challenged the prevailing assumption that brain activity primarily increases during task performance and contributed to the identification of what later became known as the default mode network. Dr. Marcus Raichle writes that there was the first formal characterization of task-induced activity decreases from a resting state was a meta-analysis of 9 PET studies involving 134 subjects by Gordon Shulman. This study generated an iconic image of a network of cortical areas that decreased in activity while performing various attention-demanding, largely non-self-referential tasks. The unique identity of this network was confirmed a short time later by Jeffrey Binder and colleagues at the Medical College of Wisconsin and Bernard Mazoyer and his colleagues in France. Similar observations are now an everyday occurrence in laboratories worldwide, as investigators seek to understand the role of this network in brain function. Finding a network of brain areas frequently seen to decrease its activity during attention-demanding tasks was both surprising and challenging. Surprising because the areas involved had not previously been recognized as a system in the same way that we might think of the motor or visual system, and challenging because initially it was unclear how to characterize their activity in a passive or resting condition. Were they simply activations present in a resting state? And why should they appear in both PET and functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI? Subsequent studies conducted by neurologist Marcus E. Raichle and his team at the Washington University School of Medicine, along with other researchers, revealed that performing focused mental tasks increases the brain's energy consumption by less than 5% above its baseline level. These findings demonstrated that the brain remains highly active even when an individual is not engaged in deliberate cognitive activity. As a result, scientific attention shifted toward identifying the specific brain regions responsible for this ongoing background activity, ultimately contributing to the discovery and study of the default mode network. Raichle and Snyder write that a default mode of functioning was initially inferred on the basis of two related observations. First, certain areas of the brain consistently decrease activity when subjects engage in goal-directed tasks as compared to simply resting quietly with the eyes closed or visually fixating. And second, this network of areas was not physiologically activated in the resting state. While initially attributed specifically to a specific system, now often called the default network, we now appreciate that all parts of the brain exhibit a default mode of functioning that largely reflects their ongoing intrinsic activity. In 2001, Marcus Raichle introduced the term default mode in the landmark paper, A Default Mode of Brain Function, to describe the brain's intrinsic activity during restful states. The concept quickly gained widespread attention and became a central focus of modern neuroscience research.
One of the things that people with depression have difficulty doing is to suppress depressive thoughts. And, what are depressive thoughts? Well, they're thoughts about yourself. I mean, they're kind of self-referential thinking. Well, one of the things that, of course, we do, if you think about the default mode network and the fact that it has to do with self-referential thinking, one of the things that we do then routinely is when we engage in various tasks that don't have a particular self-referential nature, we tend to suppress these areas. And people have often used the phrase, you lose yourself in your work. So that if you engage in work and you become very focused on something, you tend to forget yourself. Well, this probably is healthy in some ways, but people with depression have a great deal of difficulty doing this. So the question is whether there is something about depression that interferes with this give and take between the system that is very much concerned with self-referential thinking at that level, and your ability to manipulate it, to kind of live in and out of that way of thinking. Because as I'm talking to you, we're having a conversation, and I'm trying to think of, well, how do I answer these questions? And I'm not thinking a lot about my aching arm here.
It aches.
So yeah, it aches, and yet I think it's almost therapeutic. We're having this conversation, and if I were to guess it, and you were having me in a scanner, my guess is maybe my default mode network would be a little less active. So it was natural to think of things like this.
The discovery of the default mode network has fundamentally changed the way scientists think about the brain. For decades, researchers viewed the brain primarily as a reactive organ, something that becomes active only when responding to the outside world. But the study of the default mode network revealed something far more profound. Even in moments of silence, stillness and rest, the brain remains intensely active. When we daydream, reflect on the past, imagine the future, think about ourselves, or try to understand the minds of others, the default mode network comes alive. It appears to form the neural foundation of our inner world, our memories, identity, imagination, and sense of self. In many ways, the discovery of the DMN forced neuroscience to confront one of its oldest and most difficult questions. What is the relationship between brain activity and conscious experience? At the same time, researchers have found that disruptions in the default mode network are associated with conditions such as depression, Alzheimer's disease, schizophrenia, PTSD, anxiety disorders, and addiction. Understanding this network may therefore provide critical insights not only into consciousness itself, but also into mental health and human suffering. More than 20 years after Marcus Raichle introduced the concept of the default mode of brain function, the field continues to expand rapidly. Thousands of studies have explored how this network interacts with attention, emotion, meditation, creativity, and self-awareness. Yet despite all that has been discovered, the default mode network remains one of the great mysteries of modern neuroscience. Perhaps the most remarkable lesson of all is this: the brain is never truly at rest. Beneath every quiet moment exists a vast, dynamic internal universe, one continuously shaping the story of who we are. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please like and subscribe to Cheshire Corners. Tell me what you think in the comments. And as always, don't get psyched out.